Theoden versus Gul'dan.
Your soul shall be mine! This ends now!
It's completely safe.
Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about the ETH Bitcoin valuation. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. The ETH Bitcoin valuation, as always, is an interesting topic. One of the things that we mentioned is the better way to look at this, honestly, is probably just the ETH Bitcoin market cap ratio. And the reason I say that is because you can see that once upon a time, you know, we were at the range highs, and now we have more or less found ourselves near the range lows, right? And so one of the things I mentioned is that last cycle we saw ETH Bitcoin get this rally up to the bull market support band, wasn't really able to get through on the first attempt, and then it ended up coming back down for a little while, and then getting a move back up. So this is a tough position to be in because ETH is basically back where it was in 2019, around the time the Fed ended quantitative tightening. We also know that just if we didn't even have this chart to look at, that back over there, we know that ETH Bitcoin also rallied last year around this time, right? May of 2025 and then May of 2024. You can see though that ETH Bitcoin held strong, and then in July, it really started to fall back down. So what I'm thinking right now is there's still time, theoretically, for ETH Bitcoin to get some weekly closes above the bull market support band, but it hasn't really done so just yet. If ETH Bitcoin is unable to break through the bull market support band in the next couple of weeks, then I think the most likely outcome at that point would then be, say, a drop where it then tries to find a higher low somewhere potentially in the Q3 timeframe, right? I don't think, I mean, one of the reasons why I'm a little cautious, and again, that's not to say that it can't break through. I mean, it always could, but one of the reasons I remain a little cautious is not intrinsically because of ETH Bitcoin. It's because the altcoin market on its Bitcoin pair, I think, needs to go lower, right? So if you look at like alt Bitcoin pairs, you can see they've been holding support for a long time. They're now at 0.32, which is where we said they were likely going to go in June. Ultimately, I think they need to go to 0.25. Does that happen now, or does it happen later? Do alt Bitcoin pairs rally back up for a couple of weeks and then come back down, or do they just capitulate now? And, you know, depending on how that plays out, obviously will have a big effect on ETH Bitcoin. Like if alt Bitcoin pairs can get a rally for a couple of weeks like they did the last couple of Junes before then rolling over in Q4 or early Q4, then you could still see further upside by ETH Bitcoin. But the problem that I still have is that I think that the way that alt Bitcoin pairs could go to the range lows of 0.25 is I wonder if they need to be escorted there by ETH Bitcoin, right? So like if ETH Bitcoin were to drop back down into Q3, that could help alt Bitcoin pairs go to those same levels. And again, I know a lot of people didn't think ETH Bitcoin would ever go to where it did, and it still went there, right? Ethereum went home on its USD pair. ETH Bitcoin went really, really low. I hope that it puts in that this is the bottom for ETH Bitcoin. Hope's not really a great investing strategy, but you know, the way that it could be the low is if between now and whenever it potentially tests it, if QT were to end. If QT doesn't end, it's always a chance. There's always a chance that it goes lower, right? And that's a reality that everyone has to accept. It might make you uncomfortable. It makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but it's something to consider. If it does go to a lower low, and it just keeps on going lower. I mean, at that point, it'd be really hard to look at that chart in the same way, because for the longest time I've looked at the chart like this. I've said, all right, it's putting in higher lows, but it's also been putting in lower highs, right? So I've always sort of thought about it as like, you know, potentially it is, you know, converging to, you know, potentially whatever the quote unquote fair value is. Like maybe that's what's going on. It's just converging to that value, and it's putting in lower highs and higher lows. For the last few years, obviously a lot of people criticize me because they're, you know, they faded this entire move to the downside thinking it was going to go up, and they're like, well, look at all the higher lows. And I was like, yeah, I see the higher lows, but do you see the lower highs, right? And so it's a matter, I mean, it's a matter of being objective, right? Like we can see the lower highs, we can also see the higher lows, but this is still technically a higher low for now, as long as it holds. If it goes lower, there's not a lot of wiggle room between the low from the last cycle and the low that already was put in. So if ETH Bitcoin does end up falling back in a little bit into Q3, then you would want to see it put in a higher low somewhere in this range, or potentially a double bottom. If you can get a double bottom here, then perhaps by that point it could break through, if it's also accompanied by lower interest rates and an end to quantitative tightening. So that's what I would ultimately be looking at. And every single week, right? I mean, obviously, I know you guys have been wanting videos on this every single week. I see them. And I honestly, if we can be honest with each other, which I think we can at this point, I've been stalling, right? Because I keep thinking, like, I'm like, well, if this thing could just get a weekly close up here, it'd make it a lot easier. Make it a hell of a lot easier. And then perhaps at that point, you know, it would follow a different path, right? Where it got weekly closes above the bull market support band. But every week that it goes up there, it just ends up being a wick, and then it comes right back down. And so it makes me a little skittish to, you know, to want to talk about it, because I'm like, well, just give me a weekly close above the 21-week EMA, and then things might change. But as long as these are just wicks, I have to be open-minded to, you know, something like that, where it drops in, gets back up to the bull market support band, and maybe drops a little bit lower by Q3, and then perhaps bounces higher as you get into Q4. You know, and that would be if it basically played out like what happened last cycle, okay? If it just can blast through, that would be more like what happened in 2017. It's really a tough call, right? It's really a tough call. If it is going to go down here, it's more than likely due to